I'm happy to be able to be co-chairing this session, which is of particular interest to me on engagement of a younger age group in girls, 8 to 13, and my colleagues here will be presenting some results from a fascinating research study. So first, let me introduce Miriam Langer. She is a professor of media arts and technology at New Mexico Highlands University. Her focus is responsive exhibits and open source hardware for exhibit design and installation art. I also would like to introduce Tony Danstep. Did I get that right? She is a senior researcher at the Exploratorium, which is a science, art, and human perception museum in San Francisco. Tony's main research explores practitioner-driven questions about better engaging underserved audiences and the effects of exhibit characteristics on visitor learning. So without any delay, I'd like to call Tony first.
Hi. This is my first MCN, so be nice to me. So I'm going to be talking with you today about the EDGE project, which is Exhibit Designs for Girls Engagement. And this was a project that we did with physical exhibits, some that had screens, but not all. So I'm really curious to hear how you all think this transfers or doesn't in the more digital platforms. And Miriam's going to get into that a little bit as well. So the EDGE study is a 3-year NSF-funded research study that was $1 million, and the whole goal of the EDGE study was to identify the most important exhibit designs for engaging girls at STEM exhibits, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math. And this work was informed by an incredible advisory board with various different areas of expertise. We also had a huge team of people that were exhibit developers, graphic designers, writers, as well as researchers. And then we also had a very wonderful and informative group of girls that aged 8 to 13 that were also advisors. Like, they came in and advised on the project from conception of the research to interpretation. And the whole reason we were doing this study was because science museums had been noticing that we weren't engaging girls as well as we were boys. This was in visitation data, fewer girls were going, and then once there, they were having kind of a less good time. They weren't visiting as many exhibits, they were spending less time at them, and so we wanted to try to address that. So there's lots of ways you could try to address that. We chose to focus on our exhibits and to, like I said, identify the most important kind of little small design changes you could make at these exhibits in order to better engage girls. So to do that, we could start with a single exhibit that's super popular with girls, the most popular exhibit, and explore why girls are responding to it. So could it be because something's attracting to them, like they get to do some activity like dancing or drawing? Or this is the idea of self-expression or authorship? Or could it be because it has bright color? Each of these are what we consider an exhibit design attribute. And they were derived using the literature from informal education, from formal education, gaming, web design, from our groups of advisors, from lots of practitioners around the US. And as you can guess, there are many, many, many of these design attributes that have the potential to engage girls at exhibits. Another design attribute is if the exhibit includes a familiar object, or if it has multiple stations for people to gather around, or maybe it just has enough space for your whole group. We came up with over 100 design attributes and combinations of those attributes that had the potential to engage girls. And there was nothing in the literature that said, this is what will actually work at exhibits, or this is where you should focus your attention. So that was what we were doing. We were like, well, nobody wants to think of 100 things every time they try to design or alter an exhibit. That's impossible. So let's try to narrow that down. So what we did was an exploratory study where we looked far and wide to see which of these rises to the top for girls. And so to winnow that down, we began by coding every single exhibit in the study with these 100 design attributes. So here we can see this exhibit has a familiar object, bright color, and self-expression. And entering the design attributes for these exhibits was just one part of the study. We also did what's called tracking and timing, where we randomly selected boys and girls from the museum floor and asked them to fill out their gender and where they go to school and things like that. And then we tracked where they went in the museum and what they did at the exhibits. So you might have heard we followed boys too, or we included boys too, and that was to ensure no harm. Like, we wanted to see what happens for boys as well. But I'm going to focus on girls because of the purpose of the study. So we followed these girls throughout the study area and to figure out how engaged they were at each exhibit in the study. So we chose to look at 4 measures of engagement. There are lots of other ways you can look at engagement as well. Our 4 were, first, do they use the exhibit at all? Second, if they use it, how much time do they spend, or what we often call dwell time? Third, do they choose to go back to the exhibit a second, third, or even 4th time? Do they return to it? And then 4th, we looked at this engagement behavior scale, just really looking to see if they met the highest level of engagement, which was things like they repeated or varied or talked about and shared their experience. So for each girl who participated in our study, we watched and noted each of these 4 measures. And in essence, each girl gave each exhibit a scorecard. And then we did it for another girl, and then for another girl. And we didn't do it just for 3 girls, but we did it for 500 girls. That's a lot of data. Across not just one exhibit, but many exhibits. We focused on exhibits about physics, engineering, math, and perception. Of note, we used over 200 exhibits from the Exploratorium in San Francisco, and around 100 exhibits from the Science Museum of Minnesota in St. Paul, and then 20 exhibits from a smaller science center in Arizona Science Center in Phoenix. So that's not just data about their engagement at each of these exhibits, but we also, remember, collected these 100 design attributes at each of these exhibits. So what that means is we can look at which of these are present when girls are really, really engaged, but missing when girls are not engaged at all. So we used correlations and regression analysis, which allowed us to control for kind of differences between these museums, as well as things like how crowded an exhibit tended to be. And through all of that, we narrowed these to the cream of the crop, and just 9 rose to the top. So now we can focus in on those 9. And I'm going to share those with you. And just to say that data from those 500 boys, none of these were harmful to boys' engagement at all. And a few of them were also helpful for boys' engagement, but not as helpful as for girls. Okay, so these 9. I'll go through each of them. They're not in any particular order. They're all important. And let's see, I'll also give an example. I'll describe the attribute a little bit. I'll give an example of an exhibit, and then share a quote from one of our Girl Advisory Committee girls about why they think this attribute is working for other girls. Okay, so first, multiple sides or multiple stations. Girls were more engaged when exhibits had multiple stations or sides. These help girls experience the activity or phenomenon at the same time as others. So examples here include Through the Looking Glass, which is an exhibit that has 4 stations around it exploring similar topics. And then the one on the right is a sand graph, and you can kind of approach it from 3 of its 4 sides. So Elisiana explained this attribute this way. With someone else, they have the same problems as you. You figure it out with them. You don't feel alone. You have help. On to the next, but not unrelated. The exhibit fits 3 or more people. It just has space for you to all kind of elbow room to all gather around. You don't have to be actively using it, but you can all get in there. So here, this can be something you get inside of, like the one on the left, or again, Through the Looking Glass. 4 stations, 4 people can fit there. Marielle tells us what it's like when this attribute is missing from an exhibit. I came with all of my friends. There were 5 of us. Some of us were left out. I wanted to see the museum with them. Next up, It was really important for girls' engagement for them to be able to preview what to do before approaching the exhibit, to kind of understand what they're getting into. So here, this exhibit, Heat Camera, these girls are playing with, the camera is reflecting the heat on their body, so white is for when it's really hot, and darker areas are when it's colder. But there's actually this background area, like that's close to us, is a staging area where you can walk up and it explains what's going on and has different things to interact with, but you can do all of that while waiting your turn, watching what the others are doing and seeing their interactions and actions. So Elisiana lets us know, if you don't know what you're gonna do, you might feel like you're making a fool of yourself if you do it wrong. So next up, this design attribute is really close to a lot of our exhibit developers' hearts. Girls were more engaged if the exhibit was open-ended. There are many ways an exhibit can be open-ended. They can have lots of activities, can have lots of variables to play with. The outcome can be different every time, or there can be no right way to use it. So again, Heat Camera, the girls are experimenting both with their bodies, and the bench has different materials that they can experiment with, and then also that table in front of them has different items that they can play with, and there's definitely no way to get it wrong here. Anything you do is right. As Kayla says, some people are embarrassed to get the answer wrong. If there's no way to get it wrong, you can just have fun with it. And then the next couple focus on the design of exhibit labels. So girls were more engaged if the exhibit included at least one image of a person. So this could be a photo, an illustration, a video. And this one was the most surprising to us, I would say. We were expecting this to show up, and the girls were also kind of like, wow, interesting. But here's what Yasmin thought why it might work. If it's a picture of someone actually doing something, you might be curious to come over and look at what they're doing. If you think it's interesting, it's going to make you want to play with it. So what else goes on the label that's key to girls' engagement? This is what we call a use drawing, which kind of is designed to help a visitor get started in an exhibit or know what actions to do. A use drawing may or may not include an image of a person, but it always illustrates how to get started. Bianca warned us, I wouldn't really want to read it, but I could see someone in the picture doing it. She's really explaining what she needs in order to use an exhibit. Okay, so what do a rubber ducky, a frying pan, and a beach ball have in common? An element of the exhibit that most people have seen before, such as household tools or musical instruments that really are a familiar object that can bring people in and make them feel comfortable. Here, many of our exhibits have this, like a guitar, a traffic cone, and as Anahi told us, this really puts her at ease. It's like you're playing with something like a regular toy, but just at a museum. And next up, this one has to do with aesthetic design, and guess what? It's not color. It feels homey, homemade, personal, or delicate. Here at this exhibit, Nerve Journey, it shows you the travel time from your fingertips to your brain processing nerve tingle. But you get your own cozy little wicker chair to sit in, and like it's on a clearly homemade wooden base. And Anahi's quote sums it up. It feels like you're at home, like you can just relax. And then the final design attribute is my personal favorite. I'm very excited that it made it to the top. It's playful or whimsical, a little silly, kind of the opposite of serious or matter of fact. Here, this exhibit called Robot Dance, these robots were just the right thing to get people to go through the tedious task of arranging them in order to animate this exhibit. And as Yasmin reminds us, in silly things, there's not very many rules. So you don't have to worry about much. You can have fun without worrying about anything. So those are our 9 design attributes that emerged as the most important for engaging girls at STEM exhibits. Of course, I want to thank the NSF and our partner museums. And there's actually a full PDF of all of this on our website that explains this in much more detail. And now Miriam's going to talk about applying this to a screen-based exhibit, which is exciting.
We could take one question while I plug in if
Really?
somebody has a question for Tony.
Yes.
Did you find any differences among different ages?
So we did look, we only explored 8 to 13-year-olds, but we did look for differences between the 8 to 10 and 11 to 13, and there were no differences. Good question. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see how that, oh, great. Okay. So I was lucky enough to go to the first time they disseminated the information to a bunch of people from different museums, and I got to meet the Girls Advisory Board, which was just about the most amazing thing ever. The girls, they were just fantastic and so forthcoming. It was fantastic. So I work a lot of times with screen-based exhibits, and so we, after having that visit to San Francisco to learn about at that time there were 10 design attributes, they yanked one, but I'll talk about the 9. I went back to a project that I had done with some students, and we went and looked at a hands-on exhibit that was primarily screen-based and to see what we could change. So this is Coronado Historic Site north of Albuquerque in New Mexico, and we redesigned the visitor center, which had not been redesigned since 1982. My project manager is right there, and Dre led this project with my students. It was amazing. So we went in and we did a full update. On the right, we see one of our students, Elizabeth Stark. She's interacting with a physical digital hybrid exhibit about the history of the architecture and life at the ancient pueblo. And you can see the signage there, no use diagram, no people in it, she's facing a wall. I was like, oh no, look at all this room for improvement. So I took those design attributes to heart. Here's a close-up of that. You can't see from a distance what she's doing. There's really only room for one person. It was on a sort of narrow edge of a vitrine. And a lot of text on that panel with no pictures of people using it. Fast forward to what we changed. We took out the small iPad environment and we added the HP Sprout. I'm an advocate of open hardware, and this is not that, but I will address that later. This is an HP Sprout. It has a touch mat, a touch screen, and a downward-facing projection and downward-facing camera. In this case, we 3D printed the models of the ancient buildings, and as the visitor adds them to the touch mat, they create a responsive environment. We were secretly calling it Sim Pueblo because that's what happens, but we can't use that term publicly. And it unlocks new information on the touchscreen, new sounds, narratives. People start moving around in the projected environment. They go down to the river to collect things, they water their crops, and so we added that. Another thing we added was multiple seats. So now there are 3 chairs at the site. It's on a big table. You can approach it from 3 directions. You can watch people use it, and this is what you're seeing there on the left is just a picture of it facing down. I don't need to go into the specifics of how it works, but I can say that those design attributes that we addressed, just based on things that were simply presented to us at the EDGE workshop, made for very, very easy to communicate changes with the staff at Coronado. I said, we're going to go in, we're going to change this up and address these few things. What we do know from the staff at Coronado is not only is it getting more intergenerational action, parents are sitting down, grandparents are sitting down with their kids, but also it's become a very popular docent tool. The docents are much more comfortable with it because they don't feel crowded by being clustered around this little iPad that's up against the corner of this wall. They have room and space, and people are approaching from all directions. So I just wanted to share quickly how I took what was a very much based on the hands-on exhibits at the Exploratorium that we saw when we did the site visit, and took a primarily both screen and digital experience. And we do a fair amount of work with things like multi-touch tables, and that's my next thing, is how can we look at those multi-touch tables with those same attributes. So I left plenty of time, 10 minutes for questions, and I'd really like to answer any questions you have, especially Tony, because she's got the data. So.
And we also have, I'll just say, we have a little one-pager that describes the study and has the 9 attributes up here if anyone wants it. You don't, not now, but later, you know. So.
I'll sit down and we'll take questions.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a question?
Yes. By all
Okay.
means.
What about all of the other attributes? What level of focus or attention should one have on the other 91 attributes?
So, what the other attributes, some of them were also helpful in certain museums, but not in other museums. Like, they were actually harmful in another museum. So, like, they're a lot more detailed, like, each one needs a very specific eye to it, whereas these ones were always positive, always strong, like really, really shining. So the other ones, I think a few of them do deserve a little more like reckoning with, depending on your museum. And so we've written a journal article that's in review right now that goes into detail there. And then there were a couple that just didn't have enough people at them or enough exhibits to really be able to assess how well they work, but they look really promising, like image of a person, or no, self-image. Like if it reflects you, like a lot of digital exhibits reflect the person, and those seemed really, really promising, but we didn't have enough exhibits that did that in order to test. So those are really interesting to keep digging into.
Great, thanks. Any other questions?
In the back.
In the back.
I was wondering, is the goal for the visitor to learn, or is it to sort of engage?
So I think, yeah, it's a good question. I think engagement is necessary in order to learn, but not sufficient potentially. So we did actually do a focus group, several focus groups at the end of this study to explore learning behaviors at exhibits that had these several of the design attributes or none of the design attributes, and the learning does look a little different. It seemed like the learning at the edge exhibits tended to be more accessible if you already had prior information about it, whereas the edgy exhibits tended to be more like content discovery, like they were figuring it out and realizing they were figuring it out. But that's, I think, a next study that's interesting. And then, yeah.
Were there any attributes that had strong negative correlation, like do not do these?
There were some that had strong negative correlations, but not at all institutions. And we also didn't look into attributes. We looked into positive things. So we were looking at what really engages girls and then studying that. So there were a lot of things we could have looked at that we're told don't engage girls, but we didn't include those attributes in the study. So that's another one that could have a long leeway. Good question, though. Yeah. Hey.
Yeah, she was there.
I know you.
I was in the December get-together at the Exploratorium, and it was fantastic. I actually did a lot of presentations for our staff based on your stuff. Thank you. I was going to ask what one you cut, but I think I just figured it out.
Yeah.
So it was the
Self-reflection.
It was the one that we didn't have enough exhibits to really, yeah.
Is that the 10th attribute?
Yep.
There was the 10.
A lot of people at my museum too found it interesting that you didn't have enough data to be able to say whether pictures of women on the labels were different than pictures of men or
Totally.
non-specific people.
Yeah.
But But one question that did come up a lot was about learning behaviors, because of course, family learning is our brickbat for everything.
Yeah.
So you said that you had done some follow-up studies. Is that also going to be part of your published material?
Yes, so we are in the last round of edits on that one to then submit it to, that'll be in a separate journal, just because it's so much, it's a big study, there's a lot of stuff to say. So
Everything was impressed with your amount of data. Our in-house evaluator was like, holy crap.
I'm so tired. Yeah, so we thought that we would describe all of the attributes in the winnowing in one journal article, and then the focus groups are really just a start for what the next steps are, and that's where we delve into learning a little bit. And so that we're hoping to do an Aztec Dimensions, quick article, and we'll be submitting it next month, but I could share an early draft easily. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and one of the things Kathy was saying was that that we didn't have enough images of girls to test. Like we were focusing on well, an image of females might be what brings girls in or they respond to based on other literature, but we also didn't have enough images of males, so we just glommed everyone together and it still showed up, which was an interesting finding, but also just looking at the differences there would be good. Erica.
So I have a question, because Miriam was talking about intergenerational engagement in her exhibit, and Tony, I was wondering what you all noticed about intergenerational engagement, or if you were tracking that.
So we did look at, we looked at the group makeup to see if that was something that was worth controlling for, and there was nothing super interesting there. But so there was nothing that made it drastically different depending on who you were with. But we also weren't focusing on specific interactions within the group because it was so fast. Kids run to those exhibits in just seconds. So we were really down to you can track these 4 things for one kid at each exhibit, and so I think it's something that we should look into, is how it affects. And we don't know how these attributes work for older kids or for adults, and I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff there too.
Okay, one last question. Anything else? Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers.